Well, hello there and welcome to this discussion for Canberra Guided Tours, Canberra's leading small group tour operator. And joining me is the proprietor of CGT, Neil Hermes. Neil, good evening.
Good evening, Joe. Great to be here.
So in this particular discussion, we're going to be talking about one of the tour options that your business provides for clients in the Canberra region. We've discussed all about the Canberra region in other episodes, but in this particular one, we're going to talk about wine touring.
Fantastic. Yep. It's a topic close to my heart.
Now, wine touring, absolutely, and it should be good for your heart as well. Wine touring, it's the domain of many tour operators around Australia and around the world, but Canberra has its own wine region, a developing wine region, by, I guess, Australian and international standards would go.
Yeah,
it's still in its infancy. And it's starting to become renowned, I guess, in wine circles. So tell us a little bit about the Canberra wine region, Neil, and some of the main players.
Okay, well, I suppose the best thing to do, first of all, Joe, is just to describe a little how the Cool Climate Wine District, the Canberra Wine District, is different to other places that people might go to. And then when I go out on tour, there's three things that really stand out. First is it's so close to the city. Many places have wonderful wine regions nearby, but nearby might be 2 or 3 hours away. One of the wonderful things about a visit to Canberra is you can go into our wine district. We call it the Cool Climate Wine District, within half an hour of the city. So first of all, it's extremely close. It's very convenient. The second thing about it that I love is the fact that in most of the vineyards that we visit, you're meeting the owners. You're meeting the people who put the grapes in the ground a couple of decades ago. Most of the vineyards around Canberra are still family-owned businesses, and in many cases, the original owners are still present and part of the operation. So you meet the grower, you meet the owner, or their children or their grandchildren in some cases. So it's a very intimate sort of connection you get with the place. And let's face it, wine is an intimate thing. It's about a relationship. You know, you when you're trying a wine, it's about where it's from. It's about the variety, and it's often about the place and the people that you met at that place. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, of course, in an Australian context, it's unique in terms of its climate. So, you know, most of the district sits within 600 to 800 metres above sea level, which is quite unusual for a wine district in Australia. Most of our wine districts are coastal. So there's certain characteristics of the climate, and the climate is so important in wine growing that we have a real distinction in that space. So they're the three things that make it different.
So I guess you're saying, to sum all of that up, it's the Canberra Cool Climate Wine District. It's accessible. It's unique in a way that you have wines that you wouldn't get in other parts of Australia,
That's
the
correct.
other major wine growing districts.
Yep.
And
you meet
there's something a bit different. It's intimate.
You're
well.
meeting the locals. That's right.
Yeah. So take us through then. Tell us about the district. Tell us about the history of the district, how it came about, first of all, and then we'll go into some of the touring.
Okay, so essentially the district just north of Canberra was first settled by Europeans in the sort of mid-1800s. And all of those properties as they developed grew all sorts of things, including wine and grapes. So in the 1800s, there were grape areas in the district just north of Canberra, but it was very much, you know, just on the edge of the main operations. And essentially the district has become internationally famous for superfine wool production. That's where the agricultural space went to. And up until the 1970s, really that was the major agricultural activity in that district north of Canberra out to Yass, towards Goulburn, in that area of Lake George, in that district north of Canberra. It was sheep grazing and famous for that. But then in the 1970s, as Canberra grew, CSIRO brought many internationally renowned scientists to Canberra who were specialists in various agricultural research capacities in terms of.
So this is the national science.
The national science group of the Commonwealth, and lots of scientists who were interested in wheat and in barley and in other sorts of crop production, specialists in their field, came to Canberra and bought homes and lived in Canberra, and then saw in the district the opportunity to buy a small holding north of the city, within commuter range, and actually start to experiment with other crops. And grapes were one of them. I mean, there's been some olives and other things as well. But as it turns out, from the 70s, the group that then started growing wines found that the district had really fabulous characteristics for growing wines. The aspect, the climate, the soils, and they found niches for particular grape varieties. Now, they had to experiment a lot. One of the properties we visit still today, I think they've still got 12 or 14 different varieties that they originally planted to see which ones would do well. And of course, since the 70s, we now have capacity in terms of agriculture to be able to overcome the problems of having dry summers. So all the plants are on drip irrigation these days, whereas 50 years ago that wasn't possible and the summers were too dry in Canberra. So things changed then from the 70s on, and now we've got second and third generation wine growers who are part of that early development, right across the district between Canberra, Yass, Gunning, Lake George, with often small holdings, but with particular varieties of grapes which really are I wouldn't say unique to the Canberra district, but do particularly well in the Canberra district.
You mentioned some of those CSIRO pioneers, I guess, in the district, and some of those wineries still there today.
Sure.
You're talking about Edgar Reek's winery
yes.
at Lake George.
Yes.
Clonakilla with Dr. John Kirk.
Yes.
And also Ken Helm's winery.
That's right. And Barton Estate. These are all wineries that were developed by CSIRO scientists, and in some cases they're still scientists who work as researchers. And one of the things that's happening, is that they've worked out certain varieties are doing better than others, and they're pulling out some of the old things that they trialled and didn't do so well, and are now specialising in particular varieties.
Yeah, and I guess it's a different type of wine experience coming to the Canberra region as opposed to going to somewhere like the Barossa Valley or McLaren Vale or the King Valley in Victoria, because you do get sometimes, not always, but sometimes to meet the winemakers on site, or their family members, because it is so intimate.
Sure, and not only do you get to meet those people, but because they're small boutique sort of wineries, you can, in some of the wineries, you can actually see into the cellaring rooms. You can see into the production rooms. Because they're not large factory type operations where, the visitors are kept to some sort of special part of the operation separate from the rest of it. You're actually in the shed where it's all happening in some cases. So it's intimate in that sense, as well as intimate in terms of meeting potentially meeting the people who are, have just come in from doing the pruning.
So before we go into the before we go into the touring that you conduct with Canberra Guided Tours, we'll talk a little bit about the varietals here and how they're different. Australia's well known for having the big heavy red wines that come out of that sort of Mediterranean climate down around Adelaide and to an extent around the Hunter Valley, north of Sydney, and around Melbourne, in the King Valley and northeastern Victoria around Rutherglen. But that unique sort of cool climate wine region means we can still grow grapes like Shiraz, which are typically Australian grape varieties and wines, but they're far more delicate. You get a more medium-bodied red wine, Shiraz, out of the Canberra district. And what you find on these tours is that the clients actually prefer that. It's the way tastes are going.
Well, yes, it is, and it's interesting to see the way that tastes are going. And you mentioned reds. Many people will find those lighter, more subtle reds that we have in the in the district more to their liking. But curiously, a younger generation of wine tasters are finding that they don't necessarily have the prejudice against certain wines that others might have. So, people of my generation, were Riesling was a almost like a dirty word. Riesling was a very old fashioned thing, but that's becoming more fashionable. Of course, the Cool Climate Wine District is really well known for its Rieslings as well, and it's not just that they are different. Some of them are now becoming more popular again, just through time. People are rediscovering some of the wines that weren't necessarily on wine cellaring lists a decade ago.
Well, that's right. I mean, the Rieslings really are the flagship for the whites in the Canberra region, and for the reds it is Shiraz
that's right.
or Syrah now, as that new terminology comes through. Neil, how many wineries are there in the Canberra district?
So it's a little hard to actually put a strict number on it, but in that district that's north of Canberra, within the ACT, there's several. Within the actual boundaries of the ACT, there's several wineries, including Mount Majura and Pielago Estate. But most of the wineries we visit are in New South Wales, just across the border, 30 minutes out of the city. And there's around about a little more than 100 properties where they grow wine grapes.
Yes.
But there's probably around 45 properties that are wineries. Where you can where they actually produce the wine on the property, and most of those have cellar doors. So there's 40 or 45 potential places we can visit, and there's some famous ones amongst those.
Okay, so let's now go back to the tourism aspect here. What do you conduct with Canberra Guided Tours? What options do you have available? If people are coming to Canberra and they want to go on a wine tour, what can you offer?
Okay, so there's essentially three things we can offer. One is that people can book themselves onto a standard tour that's going out with other people, and that will visit 4 or 5 wineries in a day, and we will organise a place to have lunch. So you just book yourself on with others to go on a tour of 4 or 5 wineries for a day. We leave at about 9:30, get back about 4:30, and we have tastings in each place. So that's a sort of regular tour, if you like. We can also do the same tour as a charter. And on a charter, we might have a group of people doing a tour together. And if that's the case, we may then be able to select particular wineries that those people wish to go to, and actually, identify them potentially in advance. And others, the third one is to have just a private tour for a couple who just wants to go out by themselves, and we do sort of private tours like that. In which case, we can essentially visit whichever wineries that they've heard of, or tried, or been at before. So there's a number of different ways, but essentially we leave the city usually on most wine tours. I mean, a private tour could be half a day, but if it's a full day, we're leaving around 9:30. You don't want to be getting out to a winery at 9 o'clock in the morning and wanting to have your first drink.
Well, some of us do.
It's a little. some of the wineries aren't necessarily open, and it's not necessarily the best way to start the day at 9 o'clock. But we get out to the first winery maybe about 10 o'clock. We visit a couple of wineries before lunch. And then most people find 2 or 3 wineries after lunch is a good day. Now, typically people will find that there's particular wines that they like, and they may wish to buy them when they're there. And we often people will often buy wine from a number of different places, and of course they do that, and we bring them back, and they've got them to either consume when they're here in Canberra, or to take home wherever they're from. And that's a great opportunity. It's a wonderful way of connecting to a place and some people to actually then take the wine home with you. And most of the wineries in the Canberra district have a facility to be able to have wines sent to you after you've gone home. And if you're not, once a year to get a selection sent to you, so you can maintain that connection with the place that you like, and get wine sent to you after your visit.
What are some of the options for lunch? Because lunch is important on a wine tour.
Well, yes. Eating is important. There's a range of options. On our regular tour, we take our regular tour to a tavern where there's a wide selection of foods that people can have, and if they don't necessarily want to drink wine all day, they can have other selections of beverages at lunch. If we're on a private tour, we can arrange to go to other venues. There's certainly wonderful restaurants in a number of places. For example, at Shore Vineyard, they have a wonderful restaurant. At Four Winds, there's a pizza option for lunch. Some charters will visit Poacher's Pantry, where we can have an a la carte menu for lunch. Those sorts of options are open for lunch as well. So there's a good variety of different sorts and different standards of food. And the important thing too, of course, is that if we're on a regular tour with a mixed group of people and we visit the tavern at Murrumbateman for lunch, they have a facility for all the sort of dietary needs as well. So people can have what it is that they wish to have for lunch.
And Neil, just to finish up here, obviously you've got to be diplomatic, but if you had to pick one winery yourself in the Canberra region that's a favourite of yours, which is it and why? Okay,
well, I'm absolutely not going to answer that question because clearly with 45 wineries that we can visit, each has its own particular. It's like saying where would you go on a holiday overseas if you had the opportunity. It really depends on how you feel on the day, what it is you're looking for. But there's a range of really fabulous wineries, from the well-established long-term wineries like Clonakilla and Shore, and then other very popular wineries such as Four Winds, Barton Estate, Yar, Vintner's Daughter. Barton, I've mentioned Barton Estate, Eden Road, all wonderful wineries, and depending on the day, we will visit those, and people will have a wonderful experience. Actually, people will have a wonderful experience whichever of the various wineries we do visit on a particular day.
Well, speaking of Clonakilla, we actually have some glasses of Clonakilla in front of us. This is a 2019 Orada Shiraz.
Gosh, now, and we've been sitting just letting it air, have we, Joe?
We have. Now, it's certainly one of the more premium wines that they offer.
It is. Yes, it is.
Their flagship, of course, is the Shiraz Viognier, which is, again, a common blend in this district, where you'll have 94-95% Shiraz, and then you'll blend that with about 5-7% depending of Viognier, the French white grape. But this is actually a pure Shiraz, this one, the Orada Shiraz. It's a very common Canberra table wine variety. It's very common in Canberra restaurants. Quite heavy-bodied, but certainly one of my favourites from the district. So, cheers.
Well, just before we cheers, I'm glad that we're not actually on tour because, of course, I as a guide can't drink while we're on tour, but certainly talking about tours, we can drink tonight. So, yes, cheers, Joe.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, there you have it. Thank you very much for tuning into this discussion from Canberra Guided Tours. I'm Joe Prevedello with Neil Hermes.